obviously there are rules and regulations for flying these things. We have one up here we're going to be able to pass around as well. Talk about licensing, different types of drones. The drones can, you probably have been to, Walmart or, the bargain store. You see these little tiny drones for kids that are, like this big. You don't have to be licensed for those, and we'll talk about that. But then there's also ones that go all the way up to, military use that are, tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars, So we'll talk a little bit about that. We have, fixed wing drones, and then we have, a quadcopter type that have multiple rotors on here. Most of the stuff that I'm assuming everyone here has been using is stuff like this, correct? Does anyone here use a fixed wing type of a drone? Probably not. Okay, so we'll talk about different types of drones. They're used on sports fields, different types of software, and cameras, and Caleb's going to talk about some of that stuff. He has a lot of experience with some of that and the mapping as well. So we got to start with a definition of a drone. The word drone gets thrown around a lot. A lot of us have a negative connotation, or we perceive a negative connotation in the media about drones, correct? I'm sure you folks would agree with that. In the drone community, I don't know if I would say that I'm a member of that community. I guess I am by default because I fly a drone, but some folks don't like the connotation that the word drone uses, so they will recommend that you refer to them as a UAS or an unmanned aircraft system. So that's what the FAA will consider a drone. So an aircraft without a human pilot on board is essentially what an unmanned aircraft system would be. Interestingly enough, when you do get a license, you will actually get, and I have mine up here, I can pass it around. I don't know if I'll pass it around. It has my personal home address. I don't know if you folks want that. But anyway, you get an actual, looks like a driver's license that is from the FAA. It's kind of interesting. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So the different types of drones that are out there, for aerial photography or marketing, typically those are the biggest areas that are being used, but we also are getting more of these other programs, that use this mapping and NDVI. You may have heard of that, especially in the turfgrass world. Caleb will talk about that in a little bit. We have the Mavic Pro and the Phantom series, and these can be, between $1,000 and $2,500 for these two. Anything else you want to add on those two there? Okay. So the first one here, this is the Mavic Pro. This one is mine, but Caleb has the same one as well, so I will pass this around. But I think it's interesting to show folks that if you haven't seen these, or you can see what kind of size we're talking about. The interesting thing about this Mavic Pro here is that is a drone right there, and a very good one. I mean, what does these cost? A Mavic Pro?
$1,000 to $1,200.
$1,000 or $1,200 for this right here. So when I pass it around, please don't drop it. I would appreciate that. But you can see that they fit into a small bag. I mean, I brought this one along because you can fit the whole thing into a bag like this. And that's with the controller as well. So I'll show you the drone portion here first. These fold out like this, and these come out here like this. And then you have your propellers here. And they can be easily, disassembled or assembled if you break them. I've never broken a set of propellers, and I've been flying for 3 years. They're pretty inexpensive, though. Battery is on here. It's a lithium battery. If you do fly with these, they recommend that you discharge them to half capacity. You may have seen in the news before about these catching on fire in a cabin. Probably some other reasons for that. I've never had an issue with this, but they tell you to discharge these a bit. So
they're supposedly a smart battery, but sometimes they are a little too smart and they just self-combust.
Yeah. So that's that. On the front here, this is where the gimbal is in the camera. So the gimbal is what is being manipulated to get the shots that you'll see. I do have a video at the end of this. You can see a few different things that we'll talk about the camera. And we're going to talk a lot more. But this is kind of where all the money is at, is especially inside this camera and gimbal. There's a lot of things going on in there. This clear case that's on here is just protective. Normally, when we would fly, this would come off. But when I pass it around, I just want this on here just to protect that, because it's pretty fragile. In there. There's actually another plastic piece that'll hold this in here, but I have it out just so you can see how fragile that piece is there. So this is the Mavic Pro. Now there's always new models coming out. Probably some folks. How many folks here have a Mavic Pro? Okay, so the other folks, you guys have Phantoms. I see a lot of folks probably have the Phantom series. Probably Phantom 2s, 3s, 3 Advanced, 4s, 4 Pro. Mine's a Phantom 4. Caleb, I think you said.
We have a Phantom 4 with an NDVI camera on it and a Phantom 4 Pro for regular pictures.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different things out there. So I'll pass this around. You folks can take a look at that. If you haven't seen one before, they're not very heavy. And again, the battery is already connected in there. This right here, I'll start on this side. This is actually what we use for controlling the aircraft. Now with the Mavic Pro, you do have the ability to I have an iPad. This is an iPad 4 mini, I believe. This actually fits perfectly inside this holder right here. You can also use your cell phone. Does anyone use an iPad for flying theirs? Some folks use a cell phone, I imagine. Probably a lot of folks use a cell phone. You can use either or. And actually, with this model here, you can actually just fly with just this. Has anyone flown theirs with just using this controller? Did it work all right? Didn't fly away on you, right? Yeah, I never had an issue. I've not done it like this, but I have not had a flyaway issue either. So that's what this is. I don't know if I really need to pass that around. Anything else you want to add about that?
Yeah, just to add a few comments about the Mavic Pro to Tanner's comments. The main selling point to the Mavic Pro is the compact foldability and how small it is. It comes in a bag that's just like a foot tall and about 8 inches wide. You could have it packed up and be in the air in 5 minutes. It's very compact and easy to fly. I will say this is the drone I personally own, and I use this in my side business to do roofing inspections and some aerial photography and things like that. It has a 12 megapixel camera, so it is good enough to make a profit, but this is, in my opinion, the lowest drone I would go if I wanted to use it as a tool and make money with it versus the Phantom Pro, which is what we'll talk about next. I categorize these drones in consumer drones and commercial drones. So these first two I consider consumer drones. They're good enough tools to make money, and especially the Phantom, but they're not built for heavy inspections of like power lines or if you're going to be flying your drone all day or intense cell phone tower inspections, things like that. You're probably not going to want to use these. A couple advantages and differences to the Phantom is it's a little bit bigger and bulkier. It's probably 2 feet square, and it doesn't fold. I mean, it is what it is. That's the shape. So automatically right out the gate, it is a little bigger and bulkier as you're carrying it around, hauling it, but it is a lot more powerful, and it flies a lot faster. I think this goes 50 miles an hour.
Yep.
It's a lot of fun to fly. So me personally, I prefer to fly this one, but we fly these at work, and I fly the Mavic in my personal stuff. Another difference is the remote. It's quite a bit bigger and bulkier. They sell 2 different remotes. This one actually has a remote built in. It's really good for just taking aerial photography. It's much brighter than an iPad or an iPhone. So that's the main primary use that I would use this one for. I do like it. It's quicker, convenient. You don't have a cord to hook your iPhone up. The disadvantage to it, in my opinion, is that you can't use third-party apps. I'm going to get into a little bit later some third-party apps, Pix4D, Drone Deploy. You can't use those with this built-in controller, so that kind of limits what you can do with this drone, getting that controller. So my preference is flying with an iPad or my phone, which is primarily what I do. And that way I can use Pix4D, the apps on my phone, because that's what actually flies the drone. Another big advantage is the camera on the Phantom 4 is quite a bit bigger. It's got a 1-inch sensor, which I'm not a photographer, but all the photographers I know, that's a big deal. It allows a lot more light in, and the exposure is a lot better on the photos, and the clarity is much better. It's also 20 megapixel, I think, versus 12 in the Mavic. Next category I'll talk about, commercial drones. I will admit I don't have a lot of experience flying these. I know people that do, and I know a little bit about them, but they're made by the same company, but just a step up. So we'll talk about the Dji Mitrice and Inspire. Both models are capable of more technical flying and high-end customizable camera attachments. For example, the latest and greatest new camera that just came out this year, the FLIR XT2. It's actually a combination of a traditional RGB camera and a thermal imaging camera all in one lens. I checked the price on it. It was like $16,000 just for the one camera. And so that is, if you're doing some high-end work, you could certainly make some money doing that. So here are the two. This is the Mitrice and then the Inspire. So both of these, the advantage to them is you can buy all sorts of different camera attachments to just screw on. They just screw on, the gimbal screws on and off of the drone. So if you can have, if you're doing high-end inspections, you can have 4 or 5 different cameras and just plug and play onto the drone. Whereas the Phantom and the Mavic, the camera it's on it. It is what it is. You're not changing it out. So that's a significant advantage. But like I said, the majority of your money with those drones is going to be in the cameras, because those cameras could be anywhere from $2,000 to $10,000 just for a traditional camera. But you can get very high quality photos. This is a Mitrice. It's actually pretty interesting. You can actually put 2 cameras on this one. You could put a thermal imaging camera or an NDVI camera and then a traditional. And just so we're all aware, I'll talk about it a little bit more, but the reasons for these other more expensive cameras, if you were to do a search and rescue mission, say someone's missing out in the woods and you needed to search 500 acres to look for a person, a thermal imaging camera would pick up the heat sensor through the trees and everything. You could find that person just by quickly scanning it with the drone. So that's one advantage. One thing that they use those high-end cameras for.
All right. So I'm also going to talk. One thing we will mention, you will notice that we're pretty much exclusively talking about DJI products. I mean, we don't work for DJI, but let's face it. I mean, how many folks have a drone that's not DJI? What brand? Oh, well, that's really neat. That's pretty cool. Was it considerably cheaper than buying one? Okay. Oh, well, that's still pretty cool. But most folks do have DJI, so that's why we're primarily focusing on DJI because they have, something like 80% of the market share. That being said, we'll get back into talking about some of the regulations, which are important. As you can see here, I'm not going to necessarily read through everything here, but I just want to show that there are basically 2 different sides of flying. One is under what we call as, model aircraft or Section 336, or Part 107, which is primarily what Caleb and myself, and probably a lot of folks, if you're using it for work, you will be flying under this Part 107 rule. What the differences are, a lot of the things are the same. You still have to register your aircraft or your drone. This side here, you can see this is for hobby or recreation. So if you're flying it, if you're working, and you're doing it for your employer, and you're going to make a management decision, we'll talk about what else constitutes commercial use. But pretty much if you're doing it for your job and you're deciding that you're going to go out and turn the water on because of it, that is a management decision as viewed by the FAA, and you will need a license to do that. But again, a lot of the things are the same. You see there is a weight requirement here. Most of the drones, obviously, that we will use, and all these DJI ones that we just talked about, they're all considerably less than 55 pounds. So if it's under 55 pounds, you have to register it. But if it's under a half of a pound, you don't have to register it. But then again, you're probably not going to get much camera data from, a quarter of a pound drone as well. You have to fly within visual line of sight. Now, some of this is being looked into and maybe changed, not necessarily on this side, but more for the Part 107 over here. You see there's asterisks next to these things. Now, I pulled all this information off the FAA's website, like 3 weeks ago. And when there's an asterisk here, this doesn't mean that 100% of the time you cannot fly near other aircraft or over other people. You can get waivers to do some of these other things, but it is a process that you need to basically get permission to do from the FAA or from a control tower if you're going to be flying near an airport. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, especially Caleb. Caleb lives in more of in a Kansas City area, so he is familiar with being around airports. I live in rural Pennsylvania, and there's not too much going on out there. So we'll talk about some of that a little bit later. So you can see there's a lot of similarities between the two. In both cases, under normal flight conditions, you can only fly 400 feet legally. Your drone will go higher than 400 feet, and I'm sure some of you folks have probably taken them there, and I have myself as well. But technically, you can't fly more than 400 feet AGL, which means above ground level of where you're at, not sea level. Obviously, some of you folks probably live, in areas where sea level, you're way over, 400 feet sea level to begin with. So it's 400 feet above where you're at. The other thing to consider is if you're inspecting, say, a building, a roof like that. Maybe it's maybe it's this hotel here that we're staying in. If you were inspecting that, ignoring the fact that it's probably within Sky Harbor's, radius of the airspace there, you can actually fly. That building might be 150 feet tall, but you can still fly 400 feet above that building. So that's how that works. Just keep that in mind as well. Anything else you think I should add to this? Okay. So there's some of the guidelines. Most of what we're going to talk about, again, is going to fall under Part 107, which is commercial use. So any use that's going to be in conjunction with, selling photos or videos. This right here is probably a good market share of what drones are being used for in the commercial sector. You probably have seen things if you go online and look at homes for sale on Zillow or properties for sale. I mean, a lot of cases now, you're seeing a lot of imagery on there taken from above. Because Google Maps, how often are Google Maps, refreshed? This adds a whole new, area of of use to be out there, getting images like this. This is actually an image directly up above my house of what the landscape looks like in Pennsylvania, where I live anyway. Also, we have contracted services for some different things. Maybe that is involved with selling photos or videos. Security or telecommunications, obviously there's definitely a market for that. I work with growers, vegetable growers. Turf is my background, but I do work as an extension agent with other crops. And one of the crops that I work with are Christmas trees, and I visited a few different growers, and one grower who grew Christmas trees and some vegetables wanted to use his drone. He had to take some pretty cool pictures, but he actually wanted to chase deer out of his property. Or one golf course superintendent wanted to chase geese off the property with it, which, yeah, it would work for that, but technically that's illegal. But I don't know, again, who's going to catch you, I don't know. So I guess you could look at it from that as a security standpoint. I believe that they have I just saw something in the news, and I don't know if Caleb, if you know, I saw something in the news about some regulations that are in place about using drones to spy on people. I think now that there's some lawsuits that have occurred and there's some laws being put on the books that you can't just go out to someone unknowingly and be spying on them. You probably have seen those YouTube videos of people catching their significant others going out the door and going to somebody else's house. There's videos on YouTube about people doing that, but that is illegal. Pretty interesting, though, for sure. And that speaks that another thing that I didn't mention was distance and how far these things can go. Now, the battery life on them is typically about 30 minutes or so, 35 minutes if it's, the optimum temperatures outside. You can fly when it is below freezing, but your battery life significantly decreases. Now, as far as distance, has anyone flown theirs more than 2 miles away? I know that there's videos online of people going 2.5, 3 miles. That's about as long as the range. Your video feed will probably cut out. I've already had my video feed cut out, at almost a mile away, and that kind of freaks me out, so I turn around and come back right away. But it'll still be getting, you have on that screen on that iPad or on your phone, you can see the connectivity that it has, kind of like Wi-Fi bars. It's shown on there as well. So just because your video cuts out, you can still have contact with it. But anyway, so typically, about a mile, mile and a half. Now remember, we go back to those other slides, technically you should be able to maintain line of sight, that you can see it all the time. So how many of you folks think you can see 2 miles away, see that little drone out there a mile and a half away? I don't have those kind of eyes. But again, it's all about this management decision. So here's part of the process as well we're going to talk about is registering an unmanned aircraft. So it is $5, which seems pretty nominal. It's not that much money. When you look at the cost of one of those is, over $1,000. You can see on the top, when I pass it around, you might have seen that label on the top. That's the number that I was given from the FAA for registering it. And every aircraft, you do need to do that every 3 years and pay that $5. We talked about some of this here. We talk about airspace, Class G airspace. That's where a majority of our flying is supposed to occur. But if you live in an area, like where Caleb does, or if you're in a city or something like that with airports nearby, you're probably going to be flying in other types of airspaces. Fly during daylight. You're not supposed to fly after civil twilight or too early in the morning, but you can get waivers to do that. Fly at or below 100 miles an hour. None of the Phantom 4 and the DJI Mavic Pro, they don't go quite this fast. But the fastest I've had mine was about 65 miles an hour, and that's moving. That really is pretty fast. You do obviously have to yield to any manned aircraft and not fly over people unknowingly. So to become a licensed pilot, you need to schedule a test at a knowledge testing center. You can go online and find this information out of where they're at. Typically, they are at an airport. You are taking a test from, and that is administered by the FAA. So you're going to have to go to an airport to do that. You pass an aeronautical knowledge test. I'll touch base on that in the coming slides here. You complete this form here, this 8710-13 for a certificate. The TSA will do a background check on you to make sure you're not going to, you're not a known terrorist or something like that. Obviously, it is serious business because these, people overseas are using these to drop bombs and other chemical weapons in other places. So it is definitely very serious when we talk about airspace. It's a whole new area that we've been getting into the last couple of years. But the biggest thing here is that you have to complete training or retest your knowledge test again every 24 months. And I just looked at my license, and mine expires in March of this year, so I will have to undergo that process again very soon. So this is a little bit about, I'm not going to spend much time on this because we want to talk about using them in sports fields, but we want to give you an understanding, if you haven't taken the test, what you'll need to know. And there are online or in-person classes that you can take, and typically all of them are at some sort of a fee. I personally used one called Remote Pilot 101, and Caleb, you used Dart Drones, correct?
Yeah.
Yep. So
yeah, Dart Drones is a class I took. It was a weekend, 2-day deal, and it really helped me guide me through the mapping and the weather, which gets pretty technical. You'll see here in a little bit.
It does, and it might sound, a lot of us when we think about taking tests, we're not back in school. I mean, some of us might still be in college, but you think about taking tests and it's kind of daunting. And some of the information that's up here, and I'll go through a little bit just so you get a taste of what the test is like. You may initially think, I'm not going to use that, but it is important because sometimes, you may come across a use where you need to do this, especially if you're flying in and around airports and understanding airspace especially. So, there's all different things here we're going to talk about. I mean, some of this stuff is common sense. They'll ask you, like, what-if questions. If you had 6 beers to drink, should you go out and fly a drone? Probably not. So those are the type of things that are common sense on there. But we also have some airspace restrictions that are in place when you'll learn about. Security areas, obviously, if, president or someone's in town, things like that, dignitaries in an area. Restricted airspace, things like, I live not too far from an Army station, so that whole area is pretty much always off limits. You can't just fly over that any time. There's places like that you'll see on an aeronautical map that will show you that they exist all around. Stadiums and sporting events, I went to Penn State. There's a lot of tailgating and stuff goes on there. People want to get their drones, take them up and fly them over. I mean, that's illegal. They actually put in a TFR, a temporary flight restriction, around game times at a lot of your sporting events. They might. The gentleman said that the NFL has jammers out there that can do it. I don't know if they can do it. I guess they'd be spitting different frequencies out there. Are you aware if they're doing that?
I've heard of that. I don't know much about it, but it wouldn't surprise me if it's...
Really? Wow. I think that time is coming, and that is a serious issue. I mean, I have a slide coming up. If you remember a couple weeks ago, I think it was Heathrow Airport was shut down for a couple days or a couple hours or a day or something because of people flying them. I think the time's going to come that they're going to have these airports in places like the NFL or, government agencies are going to have the ability to basically point at not an actual something that's going to shoot up there, but it's going to basically be able to pull it right out of the sky just like that. I think that's coming. And I think a lot of, especially with DJI, I mean, I'm sure that they are in touch with, at the FAA and the construction of these. So much has changed in the software when you get these updates that need to come. I mean, they are logging this information of where you're flying. I mean, I certainly wouldn't want to push the envelope. Maybe like 2 or 3 years ago, you might have got away with stuff, but I don't think you would anymore. I mean, when we had the wildfires, people that lived in California wanted to go up and fly up over there, and you have all these, this traffic up there. So we obviously don't want to be doing those type of things. But here is what you'll need to understand, different types of airspace. Now, when I first saw this, it's kind of daunting. You see this Class A airspace. There's A, B, C, D, E, and G airspace. Most of what we fly, and you don't need to get any kind of permission to fly in is Class G airspace. But depending on your airport, Phoenix, for instance, is a Class B airport, Sky Harbor. So right at the airport level, it is basically like this. Now, these 2 images here, imagine it like an upside-down cake. That's what it looks like here, upside down. So the farther away from the airport you go, that cake gets larger up in the sky. But here, if you were, believe it or not, I looked on a map. We are actually probably out underneath here, where we're at here. We could technically fly about where our conference is being held right here. So the farther away you get it from an airport, the more you can fly. But Caleb's going to talk a little bit about that.
I fly in restricted airspace almost, I'd say 80% of the time, and I will note that most of the time that I fly is Class D restricted airspace. It's a little bit different than B and C in that it doesn't have any cone. For example, here, this is legal to fly up to this point, but not here. In Class D, it's restricted all the way to the ground, so you have to get permission no matter what. So I'll talk more about that a little bit later.
Yeah, a lot of your smaller airports, regional airports, will fall in this Class C and D out here. Sometimes you have helipads and things around. You'll see them show up on your maps when you're flying. So this is what, for years and still to this day, that, manned aircraft folks that are flying, they'll have electronic maps or even paper maps that look just like this. Now, this is obviously, you can see it says Philadelphia right there. I live up in this area up here. And you can see all these different, this is Class Bravo airspace here, or B airport, so it's obviously got a lot of traffic. So you can see, though, there's a lot of things going on this. Unfortunately, fortunately for when you're flying drones, most of your daily life, you don't use this. Caleb, have you ever pulled out one of these maps and looked at them? No.
Not past the test.
Unfortunately, though, you need to know how to use these for your test, unless they change it, but they still have not changed that. Because there's information on here, like these are towers right here, and it talks about how high they are from the ground, which is important. If you are going to survey this area and fly it, you need to know it's there. There's guide wires that come down. People have flown their drones into those. Kind of common sense stuff. But I'm not going to spend too much time on that. This is more of what you'll see here. So this is something that Caleb is going to talk about using this air map here.
Sure. So know before you fly, this is the one you use, is that right?
Yep.
Tanner? Yeah. So I'm going to talk about, I don't use this one in particular, but I do use,
This was an article here, quick, of just being common sense because of Heathrow Airport being shut down because of people flying drones. And we see this every year. But Caleb's going to talk a little about AirMap, which he uses.
So I will mention that AirMap is just my favorite app that I've found to use. I use this one all the time. It makes my life much, much easier. So what I've done is I've taken screenshots of creating a flight plan to show you guys up here what I go through to get permission to fly in restricted airspace. Okay, so my first one, my blue dot right here is at one of our schools. About, I would say, 3/4 of our properties are in Class D restricted airspace. So our upper management made a deal or requested permission with our local airport director and asked permission that we be able to call the tower directly and ask for permission, and that has worked well for us. The tower operators don't have an issue with it, but that that doesn't go for all the towers. That's just that one airport that we have permission to do that at. If you wanted blanket permission, you would have to. There's 3 ways to get permission. The first one is to get a waiver from the FAA. That's extremely painful, lots of paperwork, takes forever, takes months to get them because the FAA is so busy. So it's pretty much pointless to even try that. You can get permission directly from the airport tower, which is what I do. And then the third and the newest thing, I'll show you on the next couple slides, they are starting to come out with digital authorization, so you get automatic permission without calling anybody to fly. I'll show you that here in just a little bit. So the blue dot, I'm right here, clearly inside the blue circle, which, first of all, the most basic use of this app is it does all the work for you. That crazy map he showed you earlier, this does all the work for you, makes it simple. It shows you exactly where you are, where the restrictions are, whether or not you're good to fly. So here you can see I'm in the blue circle. So I zoomed in a little bit. You can see I'm right on the edge, but I am in there. And then whenever I go to create my flight plan, it's telling me I have advisories. So it's giving me this red warning, you cannot fly. And then I come down here to find out what the advisories are. So Olathe Johnson County Executive Airport, Class D airspace, requires Part 107 waiver, automated authorization coming soon. So I still, for this particular airport, I still call every time. I let them know what my name is. They want to know my cell phone number in case there's an emergency. They want to know how long I'm flying, what height is my maximum height, and then I tell them exactly where I'm at. If I'm 2.5 miles southeast of the airport, or I give them an intersection and they typically know where I'm at. So here I just wanted to highlight, I just drove right outside of the blue circle, and then I wanted to highlight that it's not giving me any advisories anymore. It's telling me you're good to fly. So then I can just create a flight plan, and it goes into the system, and it tells other pilots in the area, if they're on here, that there's a drone operator in the area. It's a very handy tool. It makes life much easier for me. I use it all the time, both at work and in my personal business. So in my personal business, I went up to the downtown airport. This is our main MCI, but this is another downtown airport that's Class D restricted. And I just wanted to show you something a little bit different. This airport, automated authorization available at or below 200 feet. So this was really cool to me. All I had to do was create my flight plan. I essentially just put in the app all the information I just told you. I put how high I'm going to fly. I literally point my finger and put a circle where I'm going to fly, and then I push submit, and it sends it to the FAA and or that tower for that airport, and they send me a text back with an approval authorization code, and I have permission to fly legally. So I don't have to call anybody. It just takes a couple minutes. It's a really awesome tool. They're trying to roll this feature out. The FAA, in conjunction with AirMap, is trying to roll these out to all the airports to loosen the economy up and allow people to fly a little bit more safely and responsibly. Earlier, Tanner mentioned temporary flight restrictions. This was a good screenshot that I got one day that I was looking at my phone. I was going to do a personal mission here, and I knew I was close to this blue circle, so I got my phone out to check, and I was good to go, but then I got to looking, and there were some red circles all over, and then one big one. Anybody want to guess what was going on that day? Yeah, President Trump was in town. I completely forgot. So from 11 to 2, there was no flying anywhere in that area. So obviously I didn't do my job that day, but that's okay. I just thought that was the first time I'd ever seen that, and it was pretty interesting. He actually landed at this airport here, but it didn't matter. Everywhere around, there was nothing allowed.
All right, so I'm going to briefly touch base on a few other things that are of importance before we get to the real meat of talking about, practical use of using these and seeing some images that we'll show you that are interesting. But one thing that's important to think about when you fly is the weather. We don't have control of the weather, but sometimes we may want to try to fly in some adverse conditions. But you'll have to know how to read what is known as a METAR or a TAF for your knowledge test. Now, I will tell you, do you know how many times I've pulled up a METAR or a TAF since I've taken that test? 0. I have never looked at them again, mainly because I'm not flying when it's going to be questionable out. But essentially, if you've taken any weather classes or you like weather, you may have seen these. Like, I use Weather Underground. I don't know if some other folks use that website as well. You can actually find METARs and TAFs on their website. Basically, you get a string of numbers right here. It looks like a whole bunch of stuff, but you have like a station identifier. So PHL, obviously that's Philly, gives you a time. All time with weather is in Zulu time, which is universal time. It doesn't matter where you're at in the world. You got wind speeds, visibility, what type of clouds. Now, it's interesting to know the difference between few clouds, scattered clouds, and broken clouds. I don't even know if I remember exactly what the difference is between those, but it tells you how high they are. Basically, it's 12,000 feet, 22,000 feet, and 28,000 feet. Obviously, this doesn't matter too much to us because we're only flying 400 feet high. But for manned aircraft, that's very important. TAFs are very similar, has a lot of the same information, but a TAF is a little bit better. This is a point-in-time measurement. So someone created this because this is what is happening right now. But for a lot of folks that are flying into cities, they want to know what's going to be going on when they get there at certain times, and that's when you'll use what is known as a terminal aerodrome forecast, which will give you an estimate of what the weather is going to be like at certain times. So I'm not going to spend too much time there. So I think now we got a few pictures to talk about.
Yep.
This is the complex that Caleb is at.
So Tanner and I wanted to share just a few photos with you to get started on actual uses in the industry. And the first and most basic use for me or for all of us is just getting simply getting an aerial view of your properties. You're going to notice things when you take an aerial photograph of your fields and of your properties that you don't notice when you're doing everyday tasks like mowing, fertilizing, watering. You're just not going to see them because you're so close to it. So it is important to get a different perspective. It allows you to create a better product. You can see exactly what your field looks like in a much better, from a much better viewpoint. So Tanner and I just wanted to share a few photos to kind of highlight that to get us started. And
yeah, so here's an image. This is like more of the things, types of fields that I deal with are, Caleb, he works at a very large school district. A lot of the things that I work with are smaller fields, municipal or county-owned fields. This is actually right across from our office. You see things. This is actually the Little League field that I played on. You can see here from the ground, I wish I would have had a picture of what it looked like on the ground, but you see things, as Caleb mentioned, totally different from the air. I'm sure everyone that's flown would agree with that. You could see all kinds of wear out here, areas that you could concentrate in. I took this picture. Take a look at that circle there. It's a pretty good job. So obviously this could be used as a learning tool, for folks that are painting or whatnot. This is obviously volunteers are doing this. This picture was taken, there's not even leaves on the tree, so this is probably in March or so or early April. But you can see, where areas a little bit more. Back here you can see fairy rings on the field. It just gives you a totally different perspective that you wouldn't normally see from the ground level. Things look a lot, would everyone agree that grass looks a lot worse from the sky than it does from the ground? That's definitely for certain. Looking at some of Caleb's picture, this looks gorgeous. Compared to some of the fields that that I see and deal with. A lot of times as an extension educator, I don't get called out to the good fields. I get called out to the bad ones. So we'll see some other kind of interesting things here a little bit later. But this was one, just certain things that you can see from the sky that you can use as a teaching tool for your crew or even for yourself. I mentioned that, as an educator, I do work with other crops. This is actually our research farm up in Rock Springs, up in State College, or outside the State College area, just to the west. And I have a hops trial up there. So we use this. In my case, we installed all these poles, 100 different poles, and we have black plastic laid, and we have hops growing in here. This is actually, directly up above here, just to get an image there. We wanted to inspect, how wonderful this lift was working here. Use it for Christmas trees. The landscape where I'm at here is, pretty rolling topography, but it's pretty well adapted for Christmas tree production. So we use it for that. We're going to get more into just turf uses, but I just wanted to outline two of these different uses here. So Caleb's going to talk about selling it to your
So
your
here
bosses.
in the next few minutes, I'm going to go over marketing your properties, using them for bonds, tracking usage on your soccer fields or football fields and comparing it to games played, some fertility issues that you might be able to notice from an aerial photograph, and irrigation coverage. The first thing I want to talk about is bond photos. That's one way we sold it to our upper management to get them sold on the idea of a drone is for years, our upper management, I went to them and asked them, and they said for years, every 5 years, they paid a professional photographer and a helicopter pilot to fly the district, take high-resolution photos of our properties. Well, that's very expensive, and they're very good photos, but the problem with that is that towards the end of that 5-year span, you're using photos that are 4 years old, and our buildings change all the time, so you're using old, outdated data, and this works better for upper management because they can get photos any season, any time that they want of any building, basically on demand for whatever they may need, and that using it for bond material is one thing that they use it for. The other thing upper management uses it for that I thought was interesting that I had no idea is we have a pretty big construction and planning department in our district. They use these photos. I've gone around and I haven't done the whole district, but I've taken a lot of photos of each of our buildings from all different angles, different heights, and whenever a construction, our construction planners, they deal with tons of contractors, multiple contractors per day. We have all sorts of projects going on. So one thing that they use these photos for is they pick a photo, they zoom in where they, like let's say some of the cement needs repaired. Oh, shoot. Some of the cement needs repaired. They can just take that photo, zoom in, circle it on the computer, email it to the contractor, and you've saved yourself 2 hours in a day. You don't have to go out and meet them. That's a pretty big advantage just from a picture, just from an aerial picture. So that's one way we sold it to our management, and it's benefited us both. So I would say just with those two reasons right there, the drone is essentially paid for because of the high expense of the professional photographer that we used before. Now, everybody's scenario different. That's just our scenario. So I wanted to share with you guys what we went through. Irrigation audits. We have approximately 65 irrigated fields throughout our district, and all the watering happens overnight. So if a head is busted and spewing every night, we have no idea because we're not there, and no one's there to tell us about it. So the only way we find out is whenever we have drought issues pop up in the middle of July. Well, this is intentional, but it still highlights the point that you can do irrigation audits on your system in the middle of July when it's 100 degrees. The grass is going to tell you real quick where your weaknesses are in your irrigation system. So rather than going out and walking all these fields in the middle of the summer, I can do a 10-minute drone flight and have 10 fields, photographs of 10 fields, and we obviously will be able to see any irrigation issues, coverage issues we might be having, and we can address them. And that's where this comes in. I can make a management decision to fix these heads before it becomes a bigger problem than it needs to be. So that's kind of the point of this. How are we using this tool to benefit us and make the product that we're putting out there better? Here's another fertility example. I like this picture. This was early spring, just before, girls soccer starts in early spring. This is one of our varsity venues. It was a little bit pale. We were kind of pushing it with some fertilizer, trying to get it to green up, and I actually applied the fertilizer. That's why I don't mind showing this picture, and as you can see, I got a good little overlap there. But had I not seen this photograph, I probably wouldn't have noticed that from the ground. So, as a chemical applicator, you never want to do that. Yeah. No. There are lots of filters, but most of the photographs that I've put in here don't have any filters. They're just tweak the exposure, and that's about it.
That is worth mentioning, that there are different filters that you can get for all the different types that, just snap on. Some of them are, especially if you're taking, depends on the type of images that you're trying to gather. Obviously, more expensive would be just completely changing the type of camera, but you can actually, in the settings, you can adjust so much of your aperture and how wide it's going to, how long the picture is going to be taken. But you can also just take these little snap-on filters that just literally pop right over the lens and can, especially if you're taking pictures of the sky or water, things like that, it can knock down some of your reflections. Sort of like polarized sunglasses, same type of a deal. Or there's colored ones that will give you different images, but that's something I'm glad that someone brought up.
So like I said, we need to use this as a tool to better the product we're putting out there. And I can say from personal experience that this photo made me a better chemical applicator because I wanted to go back and figure out my spacing, see where I went wrong, and improve that so that I didn't do that again on that field, because that's obviously a chemical applicator's worst nightmare. Tracking data or gathering data with photos of usage and comparing it. How much is the field wearing out compared to the games used? You can use that when you're discussing with your upper management. We've got way too much games going on. Here's proof. Here's weekly photos of how quickly the goal mounts are decreasing. So I just wanted to show a couple. This is early spring 2017, before the season started. Everything's looking good. And then just to use an example, this is after the fall season that we have. We've put our sand and seed in the goal mounts and started our repair process, getting ready to put grow covers down. Just a closer photo. Okay, so now for the fun stuff that I enjoy the most, I'll talk about doing mapping with Pix4D and Drone Deploy, and then later on I'll talk about NDVI images and plant health. So first I will get into the differences, or what Pix4D and Drone Deploy do. They essentially provide the same product. They're just two competitors. You can create large, accurate maps of your properties. What I mean by that is if you had a huge high school, it's only legal to go up 400 feet. You may not be able to get the entire property if you go up to 400 feet. So if you use Pix4D, it's an automated flight system. You can fly at 150 feet and fly a back and forth pattern like a push mower, and it just automatically takes photos along the way, and then the processing system glues all the photos together, and you can have an extremely high-resolution photo of your entire property, whatever you want. From 150 feet, you can zoom in and see different mulch particles in a mulch bed, or you can see a pop can and read it clearly. It's really amazing what the technology can do. It's very powerful software. You can measure elevation changes, track construction projects, and measure amounts of product piled on the surface. I have an example of that later. It's cheaper than a surveyor. It's certainly not surveyor quality, but it's close and can give you, in general, information and data that you might need to, like I said, make management decisions. It can also make 3D models, which is pretty neat. You can fly in a circle pattern around things, and it will build a 3D model that you're taking photos of. Quickly, I'll explain the difference between Pix4D and Drone Deploy. Pix4D is software that you purchase, and you download, you put it on your computer locally. You take the photos that you need with the software out in the field. You take the photos off the SD card. You put it in the computer, and that software is on your computer. It processes it right there. Drone Deploy is a little bit easier and more what I would say for beginners. You take the photos and upload them into a website, and then they Drone Deploy processes them at a remote location in the cloud, and then sends the finished product back to you. So Drone Deploy I use for my personal business because it's a little bit simpler, and there's actually a free version that I use for roofing inspections, so I don't have to pay anything for it. But if you want to get the business model, you can pay $1,000 to $3,000 per year, and that will allow you to do like NDVI imaging and mapping, more mapping like what I mentioned in Pix4D. Pix4D, depending on which model or which software you get, can cost anywhere from $5,000 to $8,000. So it's pretty expensive, but it is more of an expert program, a lot more customizations and options. You have to have a pretty powerful computer to run the software too. So again, I've given you screenshots of an example of what it's like to go out and fly a Pix4D mission. So this is one of our football fields that we are replacing the synthetic turf on. I just went out, I'm parked right over here, and all you do is it shows you an aerial view of what you're looking at. You drag and drop the corners to wherever you want. If I wanted, I could drag these all the way out and fly all these fields, this entire property if I wanted to, but for this example, I just did this field. So you get it where you want it, and then it has all sorts of options you can set. Mainly over here, you set the altitude. I usually fly anywhere from, depending on how high our highest light pole is here. So this one I was flying 99 feet. And you can also go into the settings and tell it how wide you want the pattern. So the more detail you need, the closer your pattern needs to be. And if you don't need a whole lot of detail, you can spread your pattern out. And it'll give you less photos, but it'll do it a lot quicker. So it's pretty neat in that it tells you, based upon this, it tells you exactly how long that flight's going to take. So you can do that with one battery because the battery will last about 25 minutes approximately. Once you get all this done and you turn your drone on and you connect your phone to the computer, it all just connects to the drone. All you have to do is push start, and it flies itself. It takes off by itself. It goes to the points. It runs off GPS signal, and it just flies this automatically. All I do is stand there and just monitor it to make sure everything's going okay. It takes the photos automatically. It does it all. It lands automatically when it's done. But like I said, you just stand there and monitor it to make sure that everything goes all right. And like I said, when you complete the mission, you go back and you put the SD card in the computer. It processes the photos, and then you have the finished product, which we'll get to. This is another screenshot just of Drone Deploy. It's a little bit different, but same concept. You just create the mission, go through your settings, tell it what you want it to do, and then you're done. Afterwards, it sends the photos up to the cloud and then sends you back an email with the finished map. So I have a few screenshots here of that field that I flew. We were replacing the synthetic turf, and they were taking some of the gravel out and bringing new gravel in. And there was this huge pile, as you can see. And I just wanted to kind of showcase one of the neat things. This is a screenshot of a massive pile of gravel. You can't really read it, but it tells you right here, 857 cubic feet of gravel. You just tell it the density of the product that's on the ground, whether it's topsoil or sand, or in this case, it was like 1-inch gravel. So I just put it in there. And you just click along the base to tell the computer where the base of the pile is. And that's all you have to tell it. After that, it calculates the approximate volume of that. So another example that you could use this for, if a contractor is building you an athletic field and he tells you he's going to add 6 inches of gravel, you could fly it the day before and the day after, and through this program, and it'll tell you, well, he added 6 inches over here, but over here, it's, maybe 5 or 4 1/4. So that's a valuable tool right there. It's not, like I said, it's not surveyor grade, but it gets pretty close, and it does give you an in general sense. This is kind of neat. There was a dump truck that was hauling in and out while I was flying this mission, and that's what this is. So I didn't take this photo like this. Like I told you, it creates a 3D image of this. All my photos were from directly above, but it creates its own little 3D model of what's going on so that it can measure the pile. And I just thought this was neat. This is the dump truck was there some of the time and not there the other time, so that's why it's kind of pixelated. Okay, my favorite part, NDVI imaging. NDVI stands for Normalized Difference Vegetation Index. I could probably, well, I couldn't, but somebody could probably do a whole hour-long presentation just on NDVI. It gets very technical, very quick, so I'll summarize it as best I can. I will show you the difference between traditional camera and then an NDVI lens. And then I'll show some examples of football fields before and after the season to showcase the wear patterns and things like that. So NDVI measures, what it does is it measures light that's being reflected off of the grass. So a healthy plant reflects lots of near-infrared and green light. So the remote sensor, which is this right here, the remote sensor detects how much light it's reflecting, and then it uses a formula to tell you how healthy the plant is. Basically, it measures the chlorophyll content of the plant, which in turn gives you the health. So this is our regular Phantom 4 with our, it's got the regular camera on it. We don't typically use that one. We use this drone just for this NDVI remote sensor. It's Parrot Sequoia brand. I think it's approximately $3,000 for this sensor, and it's a pretty neat tool. It can tell you a lot of things. Now, some of the images I'm going to show you that looks just like a thermal imaging camera, like it's just detecting heat, but it's not. It's a different product. So this first one, I just wanted to kind of show you what it looks like so you know what I'm talking about as we go through. So this is one of our varsity soccer fields in the middle of, I think, July. Green, just like I said, to summarize it, green is the most healthy, yellow is less healthy, and then obviously the lighter the colors go, and then red. The red's all cement, but you can see that our common grain out here is much less healthy. It doesn't get irrigated. It's heat stressed, all the things that summer brings. And then this is this is a picture during processing. The NDVI remote sensor takes photos every few feet. It actually runs off GPS too. So as the drone goes, it says, okay, I want to take more photos. And then it glues them all together and gives you this product. I want to show you an example here of the bread and butter of the NDVI camera is that it can show you grass that's stressing out before we can see it with our eyes. So whether it be disease or wilt, something's causing a problem well before we know it by seeing it with our eyes. And so that's what I want to show you, that everything looks good in this picture, but the NDVI shows a little bit different. Like I said, it is healthy for the most part. You can see some mow patterns, but then we start to see some stressed areas right here behind shortstop. And then there's a little bit of red in and around our infield on the corners and then around our pitching mound. That, I believe, is just from mowing because we use a big roller mower, and it's kind of a tight turn in there, and I think that's what that's from. But the next photo shows zoomed in, and then that's zoomed in a little bit more, you can see. So a regular traditional RGB camera might show a pretty picture, but the NDVI will show a problem before it becomes a bigger problem. You can catch it and make management decisions before it becomes a big problem. This one I did this year. I took this in July of one of our football fields. We've been watering it all summer. We try to get them as thick and lush as we can before the fall hits. So, because every one of our middle schools has their own real turf football field, but the PE class uses it also on the nice days. So it gets really, really heavy use. So as you can see, everywhere we irrigate, it's looking green and nice, all outside the white marks. And then this next one shows the wear patterns from mid-October. This is just the week right after football season ended. So all the obvious places you can see the damage. Red is stressed turf. And I just think that's a really neat tool to show, if you had a stubborn coach or something that was doing a drill in the same spot on the field every day and you couldn't get him to move, you could show him something like this and possibly get him to see it from a different perspective. This was a couple months later, mid-December, after we had fertilized and reseeded, and you can see we are already starting to get some recovery. So I just wanted to show that the camera is works well for that. This is just another option. It's inverted. The colors are just opposite. I just wanted to show you that screenshot. So red is healthy, green is not as healthy. These are more the processing photos from that football field. So this is just the very beginning stage of processing. It shows you exactly where all those photos were taken and my flight pattern. And the next one, it goes a stage further. It shows all these that are glued together to create, the one big image that it gives you at the end. It is important to mention, and I'll show you a quality report right here. It calls them key point matches, or 3D points. So the photo in the center with photos all around it is going to have a whole bunch of common denominators from the photos around it. So the ones on the side are going to have much less than the one in the middle because there's no pictures, there's no photos over here. So that takes me to the quality report where it tells you how many 3D cloud points that you share in each photo. So there's 2 images in that deal that had shared 93,000 3D points, all in one photo. So then you come down here and 19 of the images, and those are likely the edge images, share just 106. So I thought that was interesting. I wanted to show you guys. Did you have any more you wanted to say on that before I move?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
3 o'clock.
Okay.
15 minutes.
All right. So this is so those are some of the uses, and this is more just interesting information that I found about drones in general. The FAA has admitted without admitting that they're completely overwhelmed, and there's so many drone pilots out there. They're trying to come up with rules so that we can safely operate these, and it's a huge task. So they came out in 2017. President Trump signed the UAS Integration Pilot Program, and the FAA awarded 10 cities and states to do research for them on all sorts of different things. For example, Kansas Department of Transportation I wanted to highlight because it's where I live. They are doing research on beyond visual line of sight operations in rural areas, and also they're trying to create an unmanned traffic management system to help farmers, because farmers use the NDVI camera a lot. If you have 10,000 acres of soybeans, you can fly these, and you can really increase your yields by, making tweaks to your fertility based upon the plant health, the results you're getting from these. So those are the 2 things that Kansas Department of Transportation is going to research. And in fact, this past August in 2018, they flew the first mission near Salina, which is near the Polytechnic program with K-State. They did their first beyond line of sight operation, and it was legal. So at the end of the 3-year research, they're going to report back to the FAA. The FAA is going to take all that data and create essentially a new rule book for Part 107 pilots and drone pilots to abide by. And I took this straight off the K-State website. They are helping the Department of Transportation with some of the research. They are researching power infrastructure inspection. So if you want to inspect your power lines, heavy-duty power lines, you need to be able to fly a long way rather than flying, 500 feet and then having to walk to the next spot. That's where beyond line of sight comes in handy, is you can fly a couple miles, check out all your power lines or your pipelines, whatever it may be, whatever you want to inspect, and do it much more efficiently than doing it, and safely than doing it by hand. And they're also doing some research with natural resources throughout the state that I find interesting.